Hey everyone. So when people ask hard questions concerning 9/11, they're often faced with real anger or they're ridiculed. But history tells us that it's not crazy to ask questions about the government. In fact, I'd argue that it's kind of crazy not to. Because there's this one time, not in theory, but in writing, the US military proposed killing American civilians on US soil to justify the war. And that plan was called Operation Northwoods, and it was very much real. So in 1962, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed a false flag campaign to manipulate the American public into supporting an invasion of Cuba. And while that operation included bombings and shootings inside U.S. cities, fake hijackings of U.S. airliners, staged attacks on American civilians, and even blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay with real Americans on board. And this wasn't written by a rogue agent. It was signed by General Lyman Lemnitzer, the highest ranking military officer in the country at the time. The memo described using casualty lists to generate a helpful wave of national indignation. And what did that mean? It meant real American deaths for propaganda. And the only reason it wasn't carried out was because President John F. Kennedy said no. So the Northwoods memo listed specific domestic targets for these fake Cuban attacks. So they wanted to hit Miami, Florida, where Cuban exiles were to be shot or bombed to stir outrage. They wanted to hit Washington, D.C. with proposed bombings near government buildings. And as I mentioned, Guantanamo Bay, where a U.S. ship would be blown up with real sailors killed. And then there were U.S. cities besides Miami, just nationwide, targeted for random attacks to create panic and rally support. And these weren't harmless like simulations. They were blueprints for murder, blamed on an enemy of choice. And one of the most unbelievable parts of Operation Northwood was their plan to simulate a civilian airliner being shot down. And here's how it would have worked. A real commercial plane takes off, filled with American civilians, and then it lands secretly at a U.S. base, and the passengers, well, they just vanish. And then a drone is painted to match the jet, continues on the route. That drone is remotely detonated over the ocean, and then the U.S. blames Cuba. The media mourns dozens of deaths, and I guess it sounds clever until you ask, what happens to the real passengers? Well, you think the U.S. military planned to let them go once they got to the base? Definitely not. The memo never says what happens to them, but logic fills the silence. They'd be detained, indefinitely, or they'd be threatened and scared into silence, or they'd just quietly be eliminated, which I think is probably the most likely situation. The passengers weren't saved. They were in the way of the lie. So now flash forward to 2001, the worst attack on U.S. soil in history, and the foundation for two major wars. But even now, legitimate questions remain. I mean, why were hijacker passports found on the ground, but black boxes and huge skyscrapers were completely destroyed? And why did firefighters report small fires and calm conditions just minutes before towers collapsed? Why did Building 7 collapse into its own footprint without being hit by a plane and then be reported as collapsed by the BBC 20 minutes too early? And why were U.S. war games simulating hijackings taking place that very morning? Scrambling air response. And why did two of the hijackers have known CIA connections? And why did millions of dollars in put options get placed on airline stocks days before the attacks, profiting off mass death? You don't have to believe 9/11 was an inside job to recognize this. The official story has some gaping holes, and history has shown that this wouldn't be the first time. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, just an engineer, a pilot, or a senator to have some questions. So if you still think only conspiracy theorists question the official story of 9/11, well then you should tell that to the thousands of scientists, engineers, pilots, intelligence officers, and even U.S. senators who say something's definitely not right. I mean, there's over 3,500 architects and engineers who have signed a petition saying the towers, and especially Building 7, definitely could not have collapsed from fire alone. And then there's chemists and physicists who have pointed to nanothermite particles found in the dust from the World Trade Center. And then airline pilots and military veterans have said the hijacker flight paths were way too complex and it was implausible for amateurs to have executed them. And then there's William Binney, the former NSA technical director, who said US surveillance could have easily tracked the plot unless somebody made sure it didn't. And then Senator Max Cleland, who served on the 9/11 Commission, just resigned, calling it a cover-up. John Farmer, senior counsel to the commission, wrote, "At some level of government, there was a decision not to tell the truth," end quote. So, this isn't a conspiracy. It's a chorus of experts saying the official story is incomplete. The commission was misled, and the evidence doesn't add up. And they're not guessing. They're using data, documents, and lived experience. That's thousands of experts with impressive credentials. And believe me, I get it. Questioning 9/11 doesn't just mean doubting a news story. It means facing the possibility that the country you love or the government you once trusted might be capable of unthinkable things. And that kind of realization isn't just uncomfortable. It's probably disorienting. It's disillusioning for sure. And for some, I'm sure it's heartbreaking and life-changing, depending on, life experiences. But history doesn't care if the truth is painful. It just keeps repeating itself when we refuse to look at it. And I can't even get my family to entertain any of the aforementioned questions as possibilities. In fact, I can't even get them to discuss it with me for more than 60 seconds before they're done with the conversation and, off somewhere making me a tinfoil hat. But that's okay. I respect everyone's different opinions. And actually, come to think of it, at this point, I'm probably wrong about that because they're probably pretty disillusioned with the United States government at this point themselves. For anybody that's been curious about 9/11, then I'm sure you're going to know who I'm talking about, but from 2003 to 2007, I was going to a SUNY school in Oneonta, New York, and was friends with, or I guess maybe my closest friends were good friends with, and I was maybe more acquaintance with, I don't know, now I was friends with them, with Corey Rowe and Dylan Avery. So back then I was really intrigued or a bit wrapped up with the widely growing snowball that was loose change. So I went to New York City with them to hand out DVDs and listen to them talk and whatever. But anytime I was home from school and wanted to discuss any of it or show my parents or my brothers their documentary, they definitely couldn't have been less interested or more clear that they weren't going to watch it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The actual reason it's impossible for me not to be at least curious about the questions introduced by conspiracy theories surrounding September 11th is because there's so many events within recent history where we've unequivocally just been lied to by the government. There's the Gulf of Tonkin, 1964, and it was used to justify the Vietnam War. President Johnson told the public that U.S. ships were attacked, but then decades later the NSA admitted the attack never actually happened. But the war had already killed millions, including 58,000 Americans. Or the Nayera testimony from 1990, when a teenage girl told Congress that Iraqi troops were pulling babies from incubators and killing them in the streets. But she was actually a Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter and coached by a PR firm that they spent thousands of dollars on and fed a script to recite with tear-filled eyes. And I'm sure top U.S. government officials certainly knew who she was and allowed or encouraged her lie to spread. I guess it was the lie that helped launch the first Gulf War.
My name is Nayera, and I just came out of Kuwait. My mother and I were in Kuwait on August 2nd for a peaceful summer holiday. My older sister had a baby on July 29th, and we wanted to spend some time in Kuwait with her. What I saw happen to the children of Kuwait and to my country has changed my life forever. It has changed the life of all Kuwaitis, young and old. My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after an invasion, I volunteered at the Aladdin Hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
And we can't talk about the manipulation of public support for war without addressing one of the most infamous and devastating lies in modern history. The Bush administration claimed Saddam Hussein had active nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons programs. They told us Iraq was a threat to the world and linked 9/11 to Saddam, even though there was no evidence to do so. But then years later, even U.S. intelligence officials admitted there were no weapons of mass destruction, but by then it was too late. Over 4,500 American troops were dead, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were gone, and companies like Halliburton, Blackwater, and Lockheed Martin made billions of dollars. So the pattern is always the same. Create fear, blame an enemy, control the media, and go to war. I mean, Operation Northwoods wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was a signed U.S. military plan to stage terror and murder civilians for political gain. I mean, it wasn't carried out, but it wasn't disavowed either. It was just filed away and pretty much forgotten about. So if history keeps showing us that the government lies and the truth only comes out decades later, why would anybody believe that 9/11 is the one time that they told us the truth about everything? Or about anything, maybe. And I think maybe the scariest part is this. Some of the events we haven't even begun to question yet. And then one day will be revealed to be nothing like we thought they were when they were happening. We're not waiting for conspiracy theories. We're just waiting for the documents, the whistleblowers, or the accidental leak that finally confirms what, some people already knew or we knew in our gut. Something wasn't right, and they've definitely done it before. So I don't know. I'd like to know what you think about it. If you think anybody that questions the 9/11 Commission report is totally insane and a conspiracy theorist that's not rooted in reality, if you yourself have questions, I don't know. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. So let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Caroline, and this is Hidden Headlines. I'll see y'all soon. Bye.